Hey guys, tonight we're stepping barefoot onto the terracotta tiles of a Renaissance bedroom, somewhere in Florence, around the year 1492. You've just ducked under a vaulted arch, past the flicker of an oil lamp, into a room that smells faintly of lavender, beeswax, and something leafier. The bed is massive, carved walnut, draped in thick velvet curtains. A lute leans against the far wall, and resting delicately on your pillow is a fresh bunch of lettuce leaves. Not a salad, not a garnish, just the Renaissance version of a melatonin gummy. Welcome to bedtime, Italian style. You probably won't survive this, not because it's dangerous, but because you'll spend half the night trying to figure out if you're supposed to eat the lettuce, sniff it, or just admire its leafy optimism as you drift into sleep. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your location and local time in the comments. It's always fun seeing where and when folks are tuning in from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The mattress isn't quite what you're used to. Straw, feathers, or maybe wool if you're lucky. It rustles when you move. The sheets are heavy with embroidered detail and a hint of mothball. Somewhere outside, a donkey brays, and a neighbor argues gently in Tuscan dialect. You're not alone. The entire street, the entire city, is going to bed, just not quite the way we do now. In the corner of the room, you spot a ceramic jug of water and a polished brass mirror. There's no electricity, of course, just a few candles that hiss softly. Shadows move like ink stains across the walls. On a small table sits a bowl with sliced apples, a handful of almonds, and, of course, another little pile of lettuce. This wasn't just eccentricity. Renaissance Italians genuinely believed lettuce could induce restful sleep. Lettuce was cooling, a term used in humoral medicine to describe substances that calmed the body's inner fires. If you were too hot, too agitated, too full of racing thoughts, lettuce was your leafy savior. Today, we sip herbal teas. In 1492, they simply invited romaine to the pillow party. And this wasn't some peasant superstition. Wealthy families like the Medici stocked lettuce in their kitchens and their bedrooms. It was as common in sleep rituals as incense or prayer. Imagine a guest room at a luxury villa near Venice. The bed turned down with embroidered linens and a sprig of lettuce thoughtfully placed where your head might rest. Even Renaissance physicians joined the leafy chorus. One Florentine doctor wrote that lettuce, when boiled and pressed to the forehead, encourages dreams of moral character. Historians still argue whether this meant lettuce made you dream about morals, or just kept you from dreaming about anything more scandalous. And yes, people did decorate their beds with vegetables. Not regularly, and certainly not for Instagram, but the symbolism mattered. Lettuce was also a subtle flex. Having it meant you had land, access to irrigation, maybe even your own garden plot just outside the city walls. The term lettuce-headed didn't exist, but if it had, it would have been a compliment. The plant represented cleanliness, serenity, and balance. Plus, in the wild swirl of Renaissance nightlife, banquets, debates, political backstabbing, lettuce was a gentle reminder that eventually one must sleep. Of course, there were other sleep aids. Fennel seeds, rosewater, and warm goat's milk all made appearances. But lettuce? Lettuce was bedtime's MVP, especially when chilled. Some manuals suggested keeping leaves in a damp cloth under moonlight, then applying them gently to the temples. Others said to layer them between sheets, like some sort of ancient Italian sleep number system. Modern historians have debated whether these rituals actually worked. Was it the lettuce? The routine? The sheer placebo power of putting anything on your head and deciding you're now very relaxed? We may never know. But as your head sinks into a pillow, slightly damp with leaf juice, and your eyes drift across the carved ceiling beams, the question becomes less about proof and more about peace. The lettuce, of course, wasn't tossed casually onto the bed like an afterthought. It was prepared, washed in cool well water, sometimes sprinkled with vinegar or rose water, occasionally wrapped in linen or silk. The process was delicate, almost ceremonial, and the idea behind it? Entirely logical, at least by Renaissance standards. You see, back then, medicine was all about balancing your humors, not the ha-ha kind, though Renaissance Italy certainly had its comedians, but the four bodily fluids believed to govern health: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. If you had too much heat or dryness in your system, you might suffer from restlessness, sleeplessness, even melancholy. Lettuce, with its moist, cooling properties, was the perfect counterbalance. Doctors like Pietro D'Abano wrote extensively on the subject. He wasn't a lettuce influencer per se, but he came close. His texts suggested that lettuce not only cooled the liver, but also soothed the brain, a kind of leafy neurological balm. And in a world without Tylenol PM, that counted for a lot. There was also a belief that lettuce helped anchor wandering thoughts, that by physically placing it on the head, or near it, it could draw excess energy downward, settling the mind, kind of like a leafy paperweight for your soul. This wasn't unique to Italy. Ancient Greek and Roman sources also praised lettuce as a sedative. Pliny the Elder, who, let's be honest, never met a weird fact he didn't like, claimed that Emperor Augustus had been cured of insomnia by lettuce. This story was repeated often, usually by doctors who conveniently had lettuce on hand. Renaissance Italians inherited these ideas, but added their own flair. Rather than just eating lettuce, they incorporated it into bedroom aesthetics. A sprig in the bed frame, a wreath above the headboard. For the wealthy, it might be paired with violet petals or dried lavender, forming a kind of Renaissance potpourri meant to charm the senses to sleep. Now imagine you're lying back on crisp linen sheets, the summer heat still clinging to the air. Somewhere nearby, someone strums a soft chord on a lute. You press your head into a pillow faintly damp from lettuce-infused water, its earthy scent mingling with beeswax and smoke. There are worse ways to end the day. But here's the twist. Lettuce wasn't just about sleep. It was tangled in Renaissance notions of morality. Too much heat, after all, wasn't just a medical problem. It was a moral one. Heat symbolized passion, excess, sin. Coolness, on the other hand, meant restraint, purity, self-control. So if you were the kind of person who slept with lettuce on your head, well, congratulations. You were practically a saint. Still, not everyone agreed. Some scholars of the time warned that overuse of lettuce could dampen the spirits or weaken the seed. A polite way of saying it might, lower your energy in other departments. So while lettuce was praised for calming the mind, it was also approached with mild suspicion. Too much calm could perhaps lead to laziness, or worse, philosophy. Historians still debate how widespread the lettuce habit really was. Were most Italians really decorating their bedrooms with leaves? Or was this an elite practice reserved for the kind of people who also owned silver toothbrushes and velvet nightcaps? The truth, as always, is probably somewhere in between. Lettuce was affordable, easy to grow, and widely respected in medicinal circles, but turning it into a lifestyle, that took a bit more wealth, or at least a good imagination. And speaking of imagination, one Renaissance house manual actually warned against letting the mind wander to basil or the bitter orange before sleep, which, if nothing else, proves that even in 1492, people had bedtime thoughts they'd rather not confess. So as you tuck yourself deeper under imaginary sheets and shift your head just slightly on that cool patch of leaf-stained linen, remember, the lettuce isn't just there to help you sleep. It's there to keep you virtuous, or at least quiet. You wouldn't think lettuce has such a complicated backstory, but before it was cooling Florentine brows, it was a rowdy Roman party guest and a Greek medicinal staple. Yes, the journey of lettuce, Lactuca sativa, if you're feeling botanical, winds through centuries of cultural transformation. Let's start in ancient Greece, where lettuce wasn't always associated with bedtime. Hippocrates, yes, that guy, praised lettuce for its ability to soothe the belly and the nerves. It was prescribed as a post-dinner digestive, thought to calm the body for rest, but it was also tangled up with mourning. In some Greek traditions, lettuce was associated with funerary rituals, possibly because of its short growing season and its tendency to wilt quickly. In other words, lettuce was a metaphor for life's fleeting nature. Sleep and death were often bedfellows in ancient philosophy, and lettuce played third wheel. Fast forward to Rome, things got spicier. Early Romans considered lettuce an aphrodisiac. Yes, really. The Emperor Domitian allegedly served it in massive quantities during feasts, believing it sparked desire. But as the empire matured, and the hangovers from all that lettuce perhaps became too much, it took on a new, calmer role. Roman physicians like Galen began recommending it to soothe nerves and help with sleep. From the party to the pillow, lettuce had undergone a full PR rebrand. By the time the Renaissance rolled around, Italian scholars were revisiting these ancient texts with fresh reverence. The humanists of the 15th century weren't just reading Cicero and Virgil, they were studying Roman herbalists like Dioscorides. And guess what kept popping up in the margins? Lettuce, cooling, calming, useful for everything from gout to heartbreak. There's one charming little treatise from the 1480s in which a Venetian apothecary lists lettuce as most agreeable for quieting nocturnal rumination. Now, if you've ever tried to fall asleep while replaying an awkward conversation from 2009, you'll know exactly what he meant. But here's the catch. Not all lettuces were created equal. The soft, sweet varieties we picture in Caesar salads today weren't the norm. Renaissance Italians often favored bitter, wilder strains, closer to what we'd now call chicory or dandelion greens. These had stronger medicinal properties, and stronger flavors too. Some households kept small kitchen gardens, where lettuce varieties were selected specifically for their sedative potency. These weren't just foodstuffs, they were pharmaceutical tools. You might boil the leaves into a tea, or mash them into a paste with vinegar and apply it to your temples. Some texts even recommend mixing lettuce juice with poppy seeds, which sounds exactly like the kind of thing that leads to an unplanned nap and possibly a Renaissance fever dream. And still, the practice of simply placing lettuce on or near your bed persisted. Why? Maybe because it felt good. Maybe because it smelled vaguely green and clean in an age when clean was mostly conceptual. Or maybe because deep down, even Renaissance Italians liked a little ritual before sleep. Historians still argue whether this was science, symbolism, or straight-up placebo. Was it the lettuce itself that helped? Or the act of preparing it, arranging it, laying it gently like a leafy exhale atop your linens? Whatever the truth, the lettuce leaf held firm in its role. It was the sleepy green thread tying antiquity to the Renaissance, a quiet continuity across centuries of tossing, turning and trying to shut off the human brain. So tonight, as you imagine the rustle of leaves beside your cheek and the distant clink of goblets being rinsed in another room, know this: you are not the first to wonder if lettuce might help, and you won't be the last. Now that you're properly snuggled into a lettuce-approved mindset, let's stretch out and take a closer look around the Renaissance Italian bedroom itself, the stage where all this leafy drama unfolded. You begin by noticing the size of the bed. It's comically large by modern standards, not because people were taller, if anything, they were shorter, but because sleeping arrangements weren't always solo. Married couples often shared with children, servants, or even overnight guests. The phrase bedroom privacy hadn't been invented yet. If you wanted true solitude, you probably had to take a walk in the vineyards. The bed is the centerpiece of the room, both literally and symbolically. It's elevated on a wooden platform dressed with linen sheets, wool blankets, and if the family is wealthy, deep red or green velvet coverlets. Canopies hang above, not for flair, but to catch drafts. You didn't want the night air touching your skin. People genuinely believed it could make you ill. Some even thought it carried evil spirits, which is why the bed curtains are thick, drawn shut each night like theater drapes, turning sleep into a carefully staged performance. Around the room, the furniture is sparse but thoughtful. A cassone, a carved wooden chest, holds spare linens and winter furs. A small prie-dieu in the corner is where you kneel to say your bedtime prayers. On the opposite wall, a single panel painting might show a serene Madonna, or perhaps a sleepy Saint Jerome dozing off in his study. And next to the bed, of course, a table holding a chamber pot, a candle, a pewter cup of fennel water, and a small dish with 1 or 2 wilting lettuce leaves arranged like sleepy garnish. In wealthier homes, bedrooms were often on the upper floors for warmth and privacy. Getting there involved winding stone stairs, creaking underfoot, with the occasional cold draft reminding you just how long the hallway is. Shoes were removed before entering. Slippers, if worn at all, were thin leather with felt soles. The idea was to preserve quiet and also not track in the dust of the world. Lighting was soft. Candles made of tallow were common, but they smelled terrible. Beeswax was cleaner and burned with a steady flame, but expensive. So you'd likely keep just 1 or 2 lit. Everything else, your robe, your journal, your bedtime snack of figs and almonds, was arranged by muscle memory in the twilight. Now picture yourself lying under layers of wool and velvet, the mattress just a little uneven, the faint scent of lavender sachets tucked into the bedding. Your ears catch the muffled clack of a carriage wheel below, a dog barking once, then silence. The only sound in the room is the flutter of curtains and the occasional squeak of wood as the bed settles beneath you. Bedtime routines in Renaissance Italy were more meditative than mechanical. People often prayed or recited psalms. Reading in bed was common, if you were literate and lucky enough to own a book. Some households even had a designated bedtime storyteller, often a grandmother or nursemaid, who would tell tales to lull the family to sleep. These stories were rarely for children alone. They spanned folklore, history, even the lives of saints. And sometimes they'd end with practical advice like, "Don't forget your lettuce, or your dreams will chase you." Rituals were important. They created a sense of order in a chaotic world. And in that space between waking and sleeping, even the tiniest detail, a folded sheet, a candle snuffed just so, a lettuce leaf placed near your brow, was a signal to the body. It's time to rest. So as you breathe in the imagined scent of beeswax, linen, and something unmistakably green, You're not just entering a historical bedroom, you're stepping into a centuries-old rhythm where sleep wasn't rushed, but welcomed. Slowly, softly, like the brush of a leaf against your temple. Let's shift the covers a little and talk about what people wore to bed, or more precisely, what they didn't. Because when it came to nighttime fashion in Renaissance Italy, there were two dominant schools of thought: the bundle up in layers camp and the let the body breathe crew. And both had their reasoning, however leafy or logical. If you were well off, chances are you had a designated nightrobe, sometimes called a camicia da notte. It was made of soft linen, gently pleated, often embroidered at the collar and cuffs. For women, it might be ankle length, with drawstrings or delicate buttons. For men, simpler, looser, often worn with a nightcap to keep the head warm in case of sudden drafts or, demonic chills from an open window. But plenty of people, especially men, slept naked, not scandalously so, at least not by their standards. It was seen as more hygienic. After all, changing into your sleeping garments meant laundering 2 outfits per day, and linen didn't wash itself. Many preferred to disrobe entirely, wrap themselves in a clean sheet, and call it a night. There were even debates in medical circles over which approach promoted better airflow. Yes, Renaissance Italy had hot takes on bedtime nudity. Women, on the other hand, were usually expected to wear something, not just for modesty, but to preserve their carefully dressed hair. Silk caps were common. Some slept sitting up slightly, with bolsters propped behind them, especially during pregnancy or after childbirth. And you bet there were bedtime accessories: charms, crosses, tiny sachets of herbs tied around the wrist or slipped under a pillow. You didn't go into sleep undefended. The night was long and occasionally suspicious. Remember, this was a time when dreams weren't just random mental footage. They were messages, omens, visitations. The way you dressed for sleep could influence what kind of spirits visited you, or so people believed. One quirky but well-documented tradition involved perfuming the bed linens. Wealthy families, especially in northern Italy, would soak pillowcases in floral water, rose, violet, or orange blossom, before bedtime. And then, of course, there was lettuce water. Some dipped their caps or collars in it. One Bologna merchant's ledger even shows a monthly expense for lettuce-starched linen for ladies' chamber. Historians still argue whether that starch was literal or metaphorical. Was he preserving lettuce in linen? Or was he laundering linens in lettuce? Either way, the plant had entered fashion. And not just fashion, flirtation. Bedtime rituals often intersected with romance. Courting couples might exchange handkerchiefs scented with herbs. Lovers left messages written in walnut ink, slipped beneath embroidered pillows. And among all this velvet and secrecy, lettuce reappeared, not just as a sleep aid, but a symbol of cool desire. In certain circles, gifting a lettuce leaf was a coded invitation. Rest well tonight, and maybe think of me. But even for the unromantic, bedtime had its codes. If your nightshirt was freshly pressed, your bed linens lemon-scented, and your lettuce leaf dewy and green, that said something. It said you were orderly, serene, possibly a little obsessive, but in the Renaissance that was practically noble. And if you weren't in the upper class, you made do. A rough linen smock, maybe no shirt at all, a straw-stuffed mattress, thin wool blanket, and dreams as wild as any Medici's. Some scholars believe working-class Italians actually slept better. Less pressure, fewer pillows, and no embroidered guilt. So tonight, as you shift under your imaginary coverlet, maybe loosen your collar or let one arm rest cool on the sheet. Breathe in the scent of imagined violets And remember that across centuries, people have been doing exactly this, preparing the body for the mystery of sleep with whatever comforts they had, be it silk, sweat, or lettuce. By now, you're practically reclining in a velvet-draped chamber of your own, lettuce leaf tucked securely nearby. So let's visit the gold standard of Renaissance sleeping, the nightly routine of a Medici. Picture yourself as a guest at the Palazzo Medici in Florence. It's late. Stars are scattered over the Arno, and the city is winding down. But here, behind carved wooden doors and thick stone walls, life is just easing into a slower rhythm. A servant has already drawn the bed curtains, fluffed the feather mattress, and placed a small embroidered cloth over your pillow, with precisely 3 pale lettuce leaves resting gently on top. Naturally, you've just finished a small supper of stewed pears and almond bread. Maybe a little wine, diluted, of course, because full-strength wine before bed was frowned upon. The candles are trimmed. The air still carries a faint trace of sandalwood and orange peel from the evening incense. Somewhere in the distance, a night watchman clangs his bell once, twice, signaling the hour. This is how a Medici, or any powerful Florentine, slipped into the arms of sleep, with ritual, with restraint, and with an almost obsessive eye for detail. First, the face was wiped with rose water. Then came the oil, a light application of lavender or chamomile to the temples, sometimes mixed with a hint of goose fat to help it stick through the night. You don't have to like the texture, just admire the commitment. Then, the nightcap, worn to keep the head warm and to prevent dreams from floating away, as one 15th century text poetically put it. Sleep was viewed not just as rest, but as travel, where your soul wandered, visited other realms, gathered symbols and omens, then returned by dawn. Best to keep that soul from drifting too far. And the lettuce? That was your passport. Some Medici family physicians claimed it softened the boundary between thought and dream. Others believed its cool, earthy scent closed the eyes from within. A small sprig under the pillow, a leaf gently pressed to the brow. Sometimes even a lettuce water compress placed briefly over the face like a botanical sleep mask. Historians still debate how much of this was actual medicine versus high society fashion, but the line was often blurred. In Renaissance Italy, being healthy meant appearing composed. Being wealthy meant sleeping soundly and publicly. There are written accounts of noble guests inspecting each other's sleeping quarters and complimenting the freshness of the herbal pillows, as though discussing fine art, which, in a way, they were. Beds were symbols of order, cleanliness, virtue. A disheveled bed said something. A neat one. That said something else. And if you were known for lettuce-filled linens, that said you were thoughtful, deliberate, properly cooled. Even children in noble houses were taught sleep etiquette. Nannies steeped lettuce tea for restless little ones, sometimes mixed with honey or mint. Lullabies were sung softly in dialect. Doors were creaked shut just enough to block out sound but allow in the Virgin's protection. And on feast nights, when music floated in from the piazza, they were told, "Let it pass by like a dream. Sleep is the true celebration." By contrast, commoners might have slept in the kitchen, the stable loft, or wherever warmth and space were available. But upstairs, in the rooms of polished tile and carved cedar, the Medici and their guests dozed under soft sheets, scented oil, and the leafy hush of lettuce-strewn dreams. So now, as your own imaginary chamber grows dim, and the weight of the day ebbs from your limbs, consider this. You're sleeping like a Renaissance noble. You may not have a lute player in the next room, or a servant folding your robe just so, but the whisper of history, soft as lettuce, is there with you. But even inside these opulent bedrooms, not everything was velvet and rosewater. The Renaissance night came with its own dark edges, real or imagined. Because once the candles were snuffed and the latch slid shut, the world beyond the bed turned unpredictable. First came the air. Renaissance Italians were convinced that nighttime breezes were dangerous. They called it aria cattiva, bad air. Drafts were thought to carry not just chills, but illness, spirits, even madness. Windows were shut tightly, curtains drawn, chimneys blocked. And still, the fear lingered. It wasn't just superstition. It was medical consensus. Physicians believed that too much cold air, especially if it hit the neck or spine, could cause paralysis or a fever that lingered for weeks. So people bundled up, even in summer. Bed caps, shawls, sometimes even scarves tied like sleepy armor. And while we now know the bad air was more likely mold spores or bad hygiene, the fear was very real. Then came the dreams. In the Renaissance worldview, dreams weren't harmless nonsense. They were messages, visitations, warnings, or sometimes spiritual intrusions. It wasn't unusual for a person to wake up convinced they'd seen a demon sitting on their chest. Some called it incubo, a night demon. Others simply called it poor digestion. To fend off these nocturnal threats, people turned to herbs, rue, fennel, lavender, and of course, lettuce. These plants weren't chosen at random. Each had symbolic and medical value. Fennel was for protection, lavender for purity. Lettuce cooled the mind, making it harder for dangerous dreams to take root. Some households tied dried herbs above the bed. Others placed iron objects under pillows. A bowl of water was sometimes left at the foot of the bed to trap bad spirits, while priests advised sprinkling holy water on door frames once a week. There were also bedtime prayers, long whispered invocations recited rhythmically to lull the mind. They were equal parts devotion and mental sedative. One popular bedtime chant in Venice asked the Virgin Mary to close the eyes of my thoughts before the devil opens his mouth. Comforting. And then, of course, there was the issue of sleepwalking. Yes, it happened then too, but it was considered more than odd. It was dangerous. Sleepwalkers were thought to be bewitched or spiritually unanchored. If someone wandered at night, especially barefoot, families rushed to sprinkle salt on thresholds and say protective prayers over their sleeping bodies. Some even tied a small leaf of lettuce to the sleeper's wrist, believing it would tether their soul to the bed. Historians still debate whether these beliefs were shared by the wider population or mostly confined to the upper classes. Some argue that peasants had more pragmatic concerns, like mice. But many folktales and rural diaries suggest otherwise. Whether you were rich or poor, sleep came with conditions, and sometimes with negotiations. Because sleep wasn't just about rest, it was a time of vulnerability, of uncertainty. And if you were going to face the darkness with your eyes closed, you might as well bring a leaf of lettuce with you. So tonight, as your own room darkens, and the hum of whatever machine keeps your house alive fades to a hush, imagine lying still under the protective veil of ritual. Outside, the wind rustles a shutter. Inside, a leaf cools your cheek. And somewhere between fear and surrender, sleep arrives. By now, lettuce is doing a lot of heavy lifting, warding off nightmares, chilling your humors, and offering a kind of botanical comfort you didn't know you needed. But what if we told you lettuce also had healing powers? At least, according to the Renaissance medicine cabinet. The 15th century Italian physician Michele Savonarola, not to be confused with his far grumpier cousin, the fire and brimstone preacher Girolamo, wrote glowingly of lettuce's ability to calm palpitations, settle the stomach, and ease melancholy. His notes recommend boiled lettuce water for ladies prone to vapors, and compresses made from crushed leaves to soothe headaches of a moral cause. That last part still puzzles modern translators. Renaissance apothecaries sold dried lettuce leaves in bundles, labeled carefully with ink-drawn tags. Recipes called for lettuce in decoctions, plasters, even as a base for ointments. Some were for sleep, yes, but others promised relief from gout, bloating, female disorders, and in one curious instance, an unwanted fondness for gambling. How lettuce was meant to correct moral failings remains one of history's greener mysteries. And then there were the sleep tonics, home-brewed syrups made from lettuce juice, fennel seed, and a little honey. You could drink them warm before bed, much like we do with chamomile today. One recipe from Milan even adds poppy extract for extra punch, though we wouldn't recommend recreating that one unless you also have a Renaissance monk standing by with a sponge. This all sounds a bit far-fetched, but remember, lettuce contains lactucarium, a milky white substance in the stems that does have mild sedative properties. So maybe they weren't entirely off. When you broke a leaf and saw that white sap ooze out, it was easy to believe you were looking at plant-based peace, or if you were tired enough, bottled serenity. The plant was everywhere. In convent gardens, monastery kitchens, palace courtyards. Lettuce was one of the few vegetables that could be grown nearly year-round in many Italian regions, thanks to the mild winters and clever irrigation. And because it grew quickly, it became the ideal symbol for renewal. Fresh leaves meant a fresh start, a clear mind, a cool heart, which is probably why it made its way from the kitchen to the bedroom so naturally. Still, not all lettuce was equal. Darker leaves were considered more potent. Crisp heads were better for eating. Floppy ones, better for pressing against the brow. Some families cultivated their own personal varieties, bitterer for medicine, sweeter for salads. One noblewoman in Siena reportedly requested 7 heads of sleep lettuce in her will. 7. Clearly, she didn't want to take any chances on the other side. Historians still disagree on just how mainstream this all was. Did every Florentine merchant tuck a leaf under his pillow? Maybe not. But there's enough evidence in letters, house manuals, and doctor's notes to suggest this wasn't a passing fad. Lettuce's sleep aid was woven into the fabric of domestic life, a quiet presence, a green ritual passed from mother to daughter, physician to apprentice, servant to noble. And in many ways, it still lingers. Modern herbalists talk about wild lettuce extract as a natural sedative. Some European pillow sprays include lettuce essence. And yes, somewhere out there, a wellness blogger has definitely written a piece titled Lettuce, Nature's Sleepy Secret. But before all that, there were candle-lit bedrooms, linen sheets, and a bowl of fresh leaves cooling by the window. There was the gentle hush of voices saying goodnight, the soft rustle of a cap being adjusted, and the belief, wholehearted, unshaken, that somewhere in the folds of a humble vegetable, rest could be found. Now that we've lingered in the frescoed halls of Florence, let's step down a rung or two, into the quieter, dustier corners of Renaissance Italy. Because while the nobility may have dozed beneath embroidered quilts with lettuce-fresh pillows, they weren't the only ones dreaming. What about the shoemakers, the bakers, the merchant families huddled above their shops in narrow, leaning houses? Did lettuce make it into their beds too? Surprisingly, yes, though not always in such poetic form. You won't find velvet sachets or silver lettuce bowls here. But in the notebooks of midwives and the occasional town healer, lettuce appears again and again. crushed, boiled, laid flat on aching feet, or tucked behind the ear for restless thoughts. Humble households made do with what they had, and what they had was often growing just outside the window. The setup was simpler: a straw mattress on a wooden platform, or in poorer homes, even directly on the floor. The bedclothes were rough but clean, typically just a linen sheet and a single woven blanket, patched and repatched by candlelight. In the colder months, children might sleep 3 or 4 to a bed, forming a warm little pile of elbows, whispers, and shared dreams. And still, even in these modest spaces, you might find a sprig of lettuce hanging from a beam or a tiny cloth pouch under the pillow with dried leaves inside. Why? Because lettuce wasn't just for the elite. It was medicine for everyone. Growing your own was common. Selling it at market, even more so. Families knew which greens to eat, which to soak, and which to save for when the mind simply wouldn't quiet down. A tired merchant might chew a few leaves before bed, or steep them with mint in a chipped mug. A mother might sing a lullaby while dabbing her child's forehead with cool lettuce water. These weren't luxuries, they were tools. Sleep, after all, was free. But falling into it sometimes took help. And of course, the beliefs traveled. Even if a family didn't fully buy into humoral medicine, they followed the rituals passed down by generations. Lettuce meant peace, calm, coolness. Even in homes with no books, no formal schooling, people understood. When the night felt too sharp, too loud, you turned to green things. Sometimes the rituals blended. A merchant's wife might tuck lettuce leaves under her pillow and say a prayer to St. Dymphna, patron of mental peace. A stonemason might wear a token around his neck carved with a lettuce motif, part superstition, part sleep insurance. And kids made games of it, tossing leaves at each other during harvest, pressing them into pretend scrolls, or daring one another to taste the bitterest leaf from the bunch. Lettuce was part of life, every part, including the sleepy end. Historians still argue whether these working-class rituals were widely practiced or only recorded because they seemed quaint to the elites who bothered to write them down. But oral tradition doesn't always leave parchment footprints. What we do know is that lettuce, cheap, unthreatening, quietly effective, slipped across all boundaries. So now imagine it again. A creaky room above a cobbler's shop. The window cracked just enough to let in the smell of rising dough. A baby snuffling in sleep. A father already snoring. And you, curled on your side with a single leaf tucked beside your cheek. Not fancy, but safe. Cool. Human. The same lettuce that touched velvet in Florence now cools straw in Ferrara. Different beds, same hope. Let's stay tucked under the woolen sheets a bit longer and drift into a stranger corner of Renaissance bedtime, where lettuce wasn't just medicine or modest comfort, but enchantment. Because in some homes, lettuce did more than soothe. It whispered. You see, the line between health and magic wasn't clear-cut in the 1400s. Most people believed in both. Doctors prescribed lettuce for your humors, but neighbors shared stories of lettuce catching dreams, absorbing sin, or even sparking romance. The Renaissance was, after all, a time when you could believe in Aristotle and astrology in the same breath. Take love charms, for instance. In parts of Tuscany, young women would place a lettuce leaf on the windowsill at dusk and recite a line, half prayer, half spell, asking the leaf to show them the face of their future husband in a dream. If the leaf wilted dramatically by morning, it meant a passionate match. If it stayed crisp, a cold-hearted suitor. And if it was gone entirely, well, someone might be marrying a baker. Then there was the superstition that lettuce could influence fertility. Some midwives whispered that laying lettuce leaves across a bed before newlyweds entered it would ensure a calm, fruitful marriage. The logic? Cool temperaments made for better, more balanced unions. Too much fire, after all, led to arguments, and in Renaissance logic, probably gout. Lettuce also popped up in dream interpretation. If you dreamed of harvesting lettuce, it meant peace was coming. If you ate lettuce in a dream, it foretold a coming secret. And if someone handed you a leaf, watch them closely. Apparently, they had something to confess. All this from a plant that today sits forgotten under burger buns. Historians still argue whether these stories were genuinely believed or told half in jest, like bedtime tales meant more to soothe than instruct. But when you're half asleep, what's the difference? A whisper is a whisper, whether it comes from a friend or a floating head of romaine. In some regions, lettuce was even carved into charms. Thin slices of dried stem, hardened like wood, were shaped into rings or small tokens and worn around the neck. One surviving example in a private collection has the word sereno etched into it. Serene. Was it jewelry? Medicine? A promise? Yes. Children's stories, too, gave lettuce its own leafy mythology. In a few obscure folk tales from northern Italy, lettuce grows only in gardens tended by wise grandmothers or silent monks. It grants wishes, but only if picked in silence. Talk while harvesting, and the plant turns bitter. Literally. And then there's this delightful little practice from Verona. Newlyweds were given a small head of lettuce wrapped in lace, meant to be placed on their marriage bed as a symbol of harmony. They didn't eat it. They just let it be. A green little witness to the beginning of something. Lettuce, the peacemaker. Of course, not every household practiced these rituals. Some just ate it with vinegar and moved on. But across cities and villages, across bedrooms with tiled floors or packed earth, the stories persisted. Passed from nursemaid to child, scribe to apprentice, widow to daughter-in-law, always soft, always whispered. So tonight, as you settle further into your blanket cocoon, think of all the layers beneath you. Not just fabric, but folklore. Under the mattress, under the floorboards, 1,000 quiet dreams, and between them, a lettuce leaf waiting. But what happened when sleep didn't come? When even the faint scent of lettuce, the hum of lullabies, and a belly full of fennel tea weren't enough? Renaissance Italians had answers for that too, and not all of them were leafy. Insomnia, though not named as such, was well known. It went by many names: disturbed slumber, restless mind, hot blood, or most poetically, the turning of thoughts. Doctors, herbalists, and clergy all weighed in on the condition, offering remedies both charming and occasionally terrifying. For starters, there was the turn the mattress technique, literally flipping the bed, or sometimes moving it to another part of the room. The belief was that stagnant energy might collect in corners, or that the sleeper's dreams were being caught in the linens like flies in a jar. A new bed position, a new flow of air, and sleep might return. It's the 15th century equivalent of turning your pillow to the cool side, just with more existential dread. Then came dietary interventions. If lettuce wasn't cutting it, you might be advised to eat a paste of ground almonds and sugar, or sip warm wine boiled with cinnamon bark and pear slices. The idea was to soothe the belly, because a disturbed gut led to a disturbed mind. Many people believed that nightmares were caused by undigested food traveling up toward the brain. You might feel relieved to know that "don't eat cheese too late" has roots in 500 years of caution. For chronic sleeplessness, physicians sometimes prescribed a quieting bath. Not a spa experience, mind you, just a tub of lukewarm water infused with chamomile, lettuce, crushed rose petals, and once, according to one rather dramatic doctor, 3 drops of donkey milk collected at dusk. But if all else failed, prayer. Long, slow, repetitive prayer. Some folks had designated sleep psalms, which they'd whisper until the words blurred into drowsy nonsense. Others clutched amulets or counted backward from 100 in Latin. And if that didn't work, there were always the saints. Saint Dymphna, as mentioned, was popular. So was Saint John the Evangelist, believed to protect the mind. A small portrait of him might be placed by the bedside, or you could trace the shape of a cross on your pillow with your fingertip, murmuring, "Protect me from the chase of my thoughts." Sometimes, though, none of it worked. The lettuce wilted, the oil burned down, and a Florentine merchant would lie awake, staring at the dark curve of the ceiling beams, haunted by numbers he couldn't balance, or an insult delivered too sharply at dinner. Historians still argue whether these insomnia rituals were psychological, spiritual, or simply ways to pass the night. But isn't that the case even now? Whether it's a podcast, a cup of tea, or a long walk from room to room, we've always needed ways to coax the body back to stillness. And so, in the Renaissance, even the failure to sleep became part of the rhythm. You might rise, relight the candle, write a letter you never send. You might look out at the silent city and find comfort in knowing that others were likely awake too. Sleep was never guaranteed, but the attempt, that was sacred. So if tonight your own eyelids feel stubborn, know you're not alone. Across 5 centuries and a continent, someone else once fluffed a linen pillow, adjusted a lettuce leaf, and hoped for peace. And yet, for all this belief, ritual, and whispered tradition, there remains a delightful historical puzzle. Did any of this actually work? Historians, being the eternally skeptical, scroll-unrolling, side-note-reading bunch they are, still can't quite agree. Some argue that the lettuce obsession was mostly symbolic, a comfort item, a ritual with no medicinal bite, but plenty of cultural flavor. Others, more generous, point to the properties of lacticarium, the sap we mentioned earlier, and claim that yes, at least mildly, lettuce probably helped. But it wasn't just about biology. The Renaissance brain didn't operate in strict categories. There was no wall between science and superstition, between ritual and medicine. What soothed the body also soothed the soul. What calmed the mind might also be protecting it from demonic mischief or moral decay. For example, one 1491 Florentine sleep manual warns that failing to follow nighttime protocols, like saying your prayers, placing the correct herbs, and avoiding roasted onions after sundown, might lead to long hours of blank staring and the invitation of corrupted visions. That's a heck of a way to describe insomnia, but maybe also kind of accurate. There's a charm in how Renaissance thinkers tried to explain everything, not just what kept you awake, but why. Maybe your heart was too hot. Maybe your thoughts were too high. Maybe the spirit of Saturn was hovering overhead that night. Or maybe your wife had accidentally placed the bed facing west, which everyone knew made the brain turbulent. And lettuce? Lettuce was the quiet hero in all these theories. Always there, always green. Whether boiled into tea or pinned to the curtains, it became part of the scenery of sleep. Like modern white noise machines or soothing rain sounds, except organic, leafy, and only mildly soggy. Still, we wonder, was it the lettuce itself or what it meant? Consider this. You end your day not with a screen or a final angry scroll, but with intention. You select your leaf. You rinse it gently. You lay it near your head, knowing that generations before you did the same. That small act of care might have been more powerful than anything the plant physically did. And as it turns out, many Renaissance households use sleep as a measure of moral character. A person who slept soundly was thought to be at peace, balanced in body and soul. A person who tossed and turned, likely guilty of something. Maybe a bad deed, maybe bad bookkeeping. Who's to say? This connection between sleep and virtue ran deep. Parents urged children to rest with clean hands and a clean heart. Priests wrote sermons about the consequences of impure dreams. Even in literature, heroes slept deeply and well, while villains were often restless and disturbed. Night was a mirror, and lettuce, in its own small way, was part of polishing that reflection. So, does it matter if it worked? You're lying in a quiet room. Candles flicker low. Somewhere, a fig tree rustles. A cool leaf rests beside you, not because it's magic, but because someone once believed it could carry your thoughts gently across the threshold of sleep. And honestly, that might be enough. The candles are nearly out now. Wax has pooled low in their cups, flickering like tired stars. Your imagined Renaissance room is quiet. Only the soft stretch of fabric as you shift, maybe a faint breath of air brushing the curtain. Sleep, if it hasn't already arrived, stands just beyond the doorway. But before we fade completely, let's step back once more into that odd, leafy tradition, the final hush of the lettuce ritual. In many Italian households, especially rural ones, the bedtime routine closed with something called il riposo della mente, the resting of the mind. It wasn't a formal prayer or a medical procedure. It was something slower, gentler, a pause to let the brain settle. Some lit a bit of dried rosemary. Others traced shapes onto the bed linens, circles, crosses, spirals. Mothers whispered poems into their children's hair. And almost always, there was something green nearby. A single leaf on the sill, a small bowl on the floor, or a sprig nestled beneath a pillow. The plant didn't need to be perfect. It just needed to be present. In this moment, the lettuce had done its job, not as a cure or a spell or even a sleep aid in the modern sense, but as a gesture, a little act of care in a world full of chaos. A way to say, this day is over, let's try again tomorrow. And slowly, the Renaissance world would dim. The painter, exhausted after hours of grinding lapis into blue, would fall asleep beside his sketchbook. The baker's apprentice, burned from the oven, would roll onto his straw mat and sigh. The merchant would finally let go of his ledgers, and the noblewoman, her hair unpinned, would slide into cool linen sheets and close her eyes as the scent of crushed leaves floated up. Even the city would quiet. Florence, Ferrara, Rome, all would sink into the warm breath of night. Footsteps slowed, windows darkened, bells waited, and across the many chambers, a kind of peace settled in. Not perfect, not guaranteed, but good enough. Historians still debate so much about this time. Who believed what? Who practiced which rituals? Which traditions were real and which were romanticized? But there's one thing no one disputes. They were trying to sleep, trying to make meaning, trying to place small, calm buffers between themselves and the roaring unknown of night. So tonight, whether your own sleep comes easy or slow, whether you dream of tiled roofs or nothing at all, maybe let the spirit of that lettuce leaf join you. Not because it's magic, but because it's quiet, and because sometimes that's all we need. And now, there's nothing left to explain. No more rituals to follow. No more streets to wander. Just the softness of the sheets beneath you, the hush that fills a room when the world finally lets go, and the quiet comfort of having made it this far. The air is still. The thoughts have slowed. Whatever you carried today, you can set it down now, gently, like placing a leaf on water. Let the mind untangle, thought by thought, until it becomes nothing but a ripple. You don't need to remember everything we talked about. You don't need to hold on to the details of bed chambers, herbal compresses, or half-spoken prayers. Those can drift like smoke. What stays is the stillness, the soft, cooling calm that comes from stepping out of your day and into another time, just long enough to forget what the clock says. Let your breath settle, each inhale a little slower than the last. Let your limbs grow heavy, but warm. Let your eyelids drift where they want, toward that space where sleep begins. Not all at once, but in easy, quiet waves. You are safe. You are still. You are enough. And somewhere, in the folds of history, a leaf waits beside a candle, just for you.